Officially welcome everyone. On the behalf of the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium, I'd love to welcome you to today's panel discussion. Today's title is Moving Forward, Linking Transportation, Equity, and Affordable Housing. Today's event is sponsored by Heritage Bank and Absher Construction, and we want to extend a special thank you to our title sponsor, U.S. Bank. Letting some more people in here. Happy to see you guys all in here. This is great. So right before we get really diving into stuff, I'd like to start off with a land acknowledgement. We gratefully honor and acknowledge that we rest on the traditional lands of the Puyallup people. The Puyallup people have lived on this land since the beginning of time. They are still here today. They live, work, raise their children, take care of their community, and continue to practice their traditional ways. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step towards true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the Indigenous people of this land and beyond. We want to acknowledge the histories of dispossession and forced removal and reflect on this history in ways that honor the memory of those dispossessed and keep us committed to the cause of social justice for Indigenous populations. So in case you weren't already aware, I'm sure you are, this week is Affordable Housing Week in Pierce County, all of Pierce County, all about affordable housing in this space this week. So we're hosting a variety of events, including this panel. We've got 5 other panels structured just like it, but with different titles, different intersections of housing and other types of work throughout the county. Today's event is going to be a panel style discussion. So first, I'm going to briefly introduce who I am, who the consortium is, and then I'll introduce our incredible panel for today. They're going to have each about 15 minutes or so to speak about their work. The structure is some of the panelists will be giving slideshows. I think all of our panelists today will be giving some sort of slideshow. I have questions for them as well. And then we will have question and discussion time set aside for at the very end. So keep your questions, throw them in the chat, write them down, and we will have a time for discussion where you can come off mute and chat. So before we dive in to the conversations with our esteemed panelists, I'd like to just take a quick moment and introduce myself and our organization. So my name is Casey Twiggs. I'm the membership coordinator for the Affordable Housing Consortium, and I am thrilled to be your host. So we are a nonprofit. We're a membership-based nonprofit agency that provides public education, advocacy, and support for the expansion of affordable housing throughout Pierce County. One way that we do this is by educating the public on the need for affordable housing, by hosting virtual discussions like this one, other special meetings, and collecting data to share with the public on housing needs and local policy. We also advocate at the state and local levels for policies and funding that will support the creation of affordable housing and bolster the work of our members as well. So our consortium is committed to advocating for and supporting the expansion of affordable housing. With about 60 dedicated members, we range from housing developers to individual advocates. And our organization tirelessly works to foster communities where everyone has access to safe and affordable homes. So that's a little bit about us, a little bit about today's discussion. Today's focus is going to be about the intersection of transportation and affordable housing. So transportation and housing are critical components of urban development, and they affect accessibility, mobility, and economic opportunities. For instance, the average travel time to work in Pierce County is about 31 minutes each way, totaling about an hour and 2 minutes altogether. And remarkably, in 2019, about 36% of employed Tacomans, or approximately 137,000 people, commuted to King County for work. And from 2010 to 2019, the number of Tacoma workers who commute over an hour rose by about 70%. So this data underscores the significant impact of housing locations on the daily life and well-being of people. Households in auto-dependent neighborhoods typically spend around 25% of their income on transportation. In contrast, those living in areas with diverse mobility options spend only about 9% of their income on transportation. Long commutes, often over 10 miles each way. Just gonna make sure everybody is on mute real quick. So long commutes, often over 10 miles a day, are linked with serious health issues, included elevated cholesterol and blood sugar levels. The cost of transportation also reflects these challenges. So in 2022, the average cost per passenger on a Pierce Transit bus was about $14.46. And for van pools is about $11.26. So these figures highlight the economic strain on our residents and the urgent need for integrated solutions on these topics. So by focusing on transit-oriented development and enhancing access to affordable housing near transportation hubs, we can reduce transportation costs, shorten commute times, and promote healthier and more sustainable communities. So with that in place, that context in mind, I'm going to introduce our esteemed panelists for today so that we can explore these solutions and the work that these professionals are doing. So first, we've got Laura Svancarek. She is the CTR and Advocacy Manager at Downtown on the Go. We also have Tammy Apthorp, Community Development Coordinator with Pierce Transit, and Jordan Rash, Senior Project Manager of Transit-Oriented Development at Sound Transit. So we are going to start with Laura. Take it away, Laura. If you've got some slides, you've got some things to chat about, we're ready to hear it.
Yeah, hi everybody. Give me one moment to get these slides up. This is the most stressful part of any presentation, is making Zoom cooperate. Great. Casey, is that good? You see?
Looks great.
Awesome. Hi, everybody. As Casey said, my name is Laura Svancarek. I'm the Advocacy Manager at Downtown on the Go. Downtown on the Go is the nonprofit advocate and resource for all things transportation in the greater Tacoma area. We advocate for policies and projects to make it easier, safer, more accessible for people to walk, bike, and use transit around Tacoma and Pierce County. We also host a variety of community events, such as our Walk Tacoma series happening now through August, and our programming for Bike Month, which is now May's Bike Month in Pierce County. We have these community events to encourage folks to get out of their cars, try something new, and really engage with both the city, the history, the community around them in a way that you just don't get when you're driving by yourself every day. I'll talk a little bit more about what Downtown on the Go does towards the end of this portion. But I always think it's worth noting that we are a nonprofit group. Advocacy is in my job title. My role is to pay attention, to understand policy, to understand what our local agencies are doing, and to communicate that and to have opinions on it. So I am able to share more of those opinionated perspectives through this role in the nonprofit side of things. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to give just a general overview of this connection between housing and transportation that Casey gave us a little bit of already. Housing and transportation are inextricably linked. You cannot separate these two things. So just hitting a couple of those components of how these are connected. Housing and transportation are the largest household costs. As rents increase, housing prices increase, so do transportation costs and the cost of owning personal vehicles. The estimate is that it costs about $12,000 a year to own a car. This estimate comes from increasing cost of financing and interest rates on purchasing vehicles, but also maintenance, gas, parking, and general depreciation of vehicle value. So it's expensive to own a car, even if these are costs that we kind of internalize and don't think about. Maybe you don't pull every transportation cost into a separate line item in your monthly budget, but it really does add up. And for many people, the cost of owning a car is prohibitively expensive. But because of the way that our transportation network is set up, because of the way that our cities are designed, it's not seen as an option for most people to say, well, I'm going to cut that cost out. I'm going to choose not to have a car, because it can be incredibly difficult to get to work, to access services that you need to get groceries, things like that, without a car. So we look at where can we cut costs in other places. And as housing costs continue to increase, we see displacement and we see sprawl. We see people moving to find cheaper housing, by going out into suburban areas, but also into areas that are historically rural and in many cases are still zoned as rural. We see these spaces really being built up in kind of a haphazard way. So people are getting pushed further out from urban centers. And that just means that you need to travel further to get to where you need to go for your daily life. I have yet to find a better way to visually represent this, so forgive my kind of wonky little PowerPoint drawing here. But the idea here, right, is lack of affordable housing creates sprawl and an increase in car dependence because you're traveling further. That also means we have more people who are driving on roadways that were not designed to carry this number of people driving. So that's further increasing congestion, which is connected to pollution. It's connected to those health outcomes like Casey mentioned. We know that it's bad for us to be driving for long periods of time. It's bad for our mental and physical health. It's bad for how we engage with our communities. This is kind of a lose-lose sort of situation. The other issue is that the further you get away from these urban centers, you have fewer transportation amenities. So what I mean by that is you are less likely to have completed sidewalk networks to allow you to safely walk where you need to go. You're less likely to have safe bike infrastructure that allows you to travel by bike to these services without feeling like your life is in danger. And you're less likely to have options in transit if you have transit around you at all. If you have transit, it's likely to be infrequent. It's likely to go mostly to job centers and not allowing you to access the things that make life good, like community or a preferred grocery store, things like that. So this is an increase in car dependence and fewer options for your mobility. And maybe for some people that trade-off is okay. Maybe if you're a young professional, you can make that work. But you have to think about this from a variety of perspectives. If you're a parent and your job is an hour away and you've got kids that need to make it to daycare, that need to make it to before and after school activities, all these things, how do you make that work? What if you are too young to drive, but you're old enough to want to be independent? You want to hang out with your friends, you want to do after school sports, you want to get a job, but you're not able to drive or you're not able to afford a car. What if you have aged out of driving and it's no longer safe for you to drive? Our seniors have just as many needs in their daily lives as young adults do. And often you need to access medical specialists, and those are going to be in those urban areas. So how do you get to your doctor's appointments? The reality is that people need to get around without driving. And we have an estimate that about 1/4 of Washingtonians do not drive, and whether if that is age, disability, or by choice of not driving, that is a huge portion of our communities that we don't think about, and we don't think about their mobility needs. And if you don't drive, that doesn't change the fact that you need to get places. It just puts you on infrastructure that is unsafe. You still need to go where you need to go. And I'll share a fast example from my life. Before I lived in Tacoma, I lived out on the Key Peninsula outside of Big Harbor. If you're familiar with the Key Peninsula, then you already know where this is going. The first year I lived out there, I did not have a car because I could not afford to buy a car. And there are not sidewalks on the KP. There's not even shoulders. There's ditches. There's people driving very fast on roads with a lot of blind curves. And I was lucky compared to many other people without cars out in that area that I lived about a mile from the grocery store. And so I would walk to the grocery store until it became so stressful for me. It felt so incredibly unsafe that I relied almost entirely on favors from my coworkers to be able to get to the grocery store, to be able to live my life. And it's incredibly isolating and it's incredibly scary. So the point here is that we have so many people in our communities that do not drive or that don't always have access to a car. Maybe sometimes they do, and they still need to be able to access services, community, groceries, all of these different things. It doesn't change just because you don't have as many mobility options. So what we're talking about today really is transit-oriented development. And Jordan's going to go into more detail about this. I'm just giving like a very fast overview of what is transit-oriented development, or TOD. So generally, you can think of this as prioritizing high-density mixed-use areas around high-capacity transit. So high-capacity transit that is able to move a lot of people quickly, either through high frequencies or through like physically larger coaches, being able to hold more people. And the idea on TOD is that we can encourage this development in a way that will encourage more people to use transit so that they don't need to be as reliant on driving and don't need to own personal vehicles. You can cut down that expense, and we can also cut down some of the impact on our roadways and the impacts on our climate. So some components you often see in TOD, that dense housing. So really we're talking about apartments here, often that are developed to be affordable specifically. We might see things like ground floor commercial or just commercial in general. And honestly, what I mean here is like this idea of 15-minute cities that many of you I'm sure have heard about. The idea that you should be able to walk in your general like immediate area to be able to access, again, those things that make life good. So maybe a health clinic, maybe a coffee shop, maybe a barber shop, maybe the grocery store is a fast, just a couple of stops, bus ride away from you. The idea that you can access these services within this mixed use area. And walkability is a big component of this. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of my slides as well. TOD doesn't just happen, it has to be done intentionally. It requires appropriate zoning. So if you're in Tacoma, you've likely heard of the Home in Tacoma project. A component of that, if you've seen the zoning maps, you'll see these kind of mixed use areas on these transit arterials. We need zoning that allows for density and for mixed use, and mixing that residential and that commercial. Otherwise, we get a situation where all you are able to build is single family homes. Whereas if we're encouraging density, we're encouraging growth, we're encouraging travel without personal vehicles, then we need to actually be able to build that density. I'm going to take a second to talk about what Downtown on the Go is advocating for in terms of housing and transportation access. Our priority, overarching in everything that we do, is safety and access. Can people get where they need to go? Can they get there safely? Our other main priorities are equity. So by equity in this context, I'm referring to historic disinvestment, how we address that. So we know that low-income neighborhoods and communities of color are less likely to have completed sidewalk networks, bike infrastructure, less likely to have those transportation amenities. We also know that communities of color particularly are more impacted by traffic violence. So unsafe situations on our roadways where pedestrians and cyclists are hit by drivers, but also crashes on the roadways between drivers because of the way that our roads are designed. So we're looking at, why did this historic disinvestment happen? What are we doing to address it? How can we keep from accidentally perpetuating further in unequal investment in our city? We're also very focused on climate resilience. Transportation is the highest contributing factor to greenhouse gas emissions in the Puget Sound region. That's pretty universally true of most regions. And I'll take a quick side note to say that when we're talking about transportation and climate, often the first thing that comes up is electrification, electric vehicles. While electrification is definitely important as we address transportation's impact on climate, we need people to be outside of vehicles entirely. Electric vehicles are not a panacea. They will not fix this problem. We need to create a system where people don't need to be in cars point blank. And that's a big lift, but it's all incremental, right? We're also very focused on density, creating those walkable, dense spaces where you can access what you need to more easily in your community. This is a big year for policy updates in transportation. I did a larger policy update for the Affordable Housing Consortium last month, and I believe that recording is available if you want to learn more about transportation policy in Tacoma and Pierce County and see some of these slides again. But as we're looking at these big policy updates, comprehensive plan, transportation master plan, home in Tacoma, it's the biennial budget for the city of Tacoma, lots of stuff happening. Our priorities generally are encouraging collaboration between the city, the state, the county, and our transit agencies. We need this interjurisdictional collaboration. We've all got the same goals. We want to see fewer people driving. We want to see fewer people being injured or dying in traffic crashes. We all want to see these things. But in order to make that happen, we need active collaboration between our jurisdictions, not just checking boxes as we go through projects. With Home in Tacoma Phase 2 going through the final public engagement process in the next couple of months with the City of Tacoma Council, we are very interested in advocating for increased density as said, but also in maintaining the currently proposed reduced parking minimums. I'm not going to get into parking right now, but if people want to talk about parking in the Q&A, I would be happy to talk about it. And we're also encouraging the city to look at new funding avenues for active transportation. So that's sidewalks, bike lanes, things like that. Currently, our budgets really go to grant match, and that's it's very limiting. The city's not able to build as many projects as we would all like to see happen because there's not enough funding to allow them to get the grants that they need. So we're encouraging the city to look at new ways of increasing active transportation funding, whether there's lots of different avenues there, like impact fees for developers, vehicle licensing fees, transportation benefits districts. There's all of these different ways. And the reality is that if we don't identify new ways of increasing funding, we will not make the progress that we need to. And the last thing I'm going to speak about, and this brings us more clearly back to transit-oriented development, so don't worry, is this, what I've been calling concurrent investment, and I don't know if there's a more specific term for it. Maybe Jordan has a term for it. But the idea is that with TOD, with Home in Tacoma, with all of these different things, where we're looking at increasing density, we're looking at reducing car dependence, we are asking people to move to these arterials with more frequent or higher capacity transit. The reality of those arterials right now is that they are deeply unpleasant places to be. It's high vehicle traffic at high speeds. There's a lack of trees. It's just a very unpleasant place to be a pedestrian. It's an unpleasant place to be waiting for the bus, even where there are signals to cross streets. I'm thinking about like Pacific Avenue, Portland Avenue. It can still feel very unsafe to be outside of a vehicle in these areas. And so we're asking people, particularly low-income people, to move to new development in these spaces. We're asking them to do that outside of a car. At the same time, it is imperative that we ensure that you actually can safely and comfortably live without a car in these areas, that it doesn't feel like you've been placed in this spot as kind of an afterthought. this is an equity concern. So if we're promoting car-free life, it needs to actually be like a decent way to live your life. If we're requiring increased bike parking, that's awesome, but it doesn't really mean anything if there's no safe bike infrastructure to actually ride your bike on. If we're asking people to take the bus, then we need to make sure that the bus actually comes frequently enough and gets you to more than just job centers or outside of the county to go work in King County. You need to actually be able to live your life, access healthcare, groceries, community, all of these different things. So we need to be investing in our infrastructure, in our amenities at the same time as we are putting development in. So when people move in, it's already a better place to live and walk and to have a life. So I'm going to put my contact information on the screen again, but I'm sure it'll be available after. That's what I've got for folks today. And then I'm happy to answer any questions when we get to the Q&A. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Laura. That was wonderful. We love Downtown on the Go. We are gonna roll right into our next panelist, rolling right along here. So Tammy Apthorp from Community Development Coordinator, she's the Community Development Coordinator. Woo, there we go, for Pierce Transit. Take it away, Amy. Thank you so much again, Laura.
Okay, how are we doing here on seeing my slide and
Beautiful.
sound? Fabulous.
Yep.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm excited to be here with everyone. As Casey said, I'm with Pierce Transit. I've been here, gosh, actually next month will be 26 years. So most of my tenure has been centered around being in rideshare, formerly known as van pool. And then in the last 5 years, we combined a couple of departments and the community development team came into play. So I just want to kind of step back from me for a second and talk a little bit about our agency specifically and, more about us. So what is Pierce Transit? We are your local Pierce County's public transportation provider. So our footprint doesn't cover the entire square footage of Pierce County. We cover the 292 square miles within Pierce County, known as the Public Transit Benefit Area, otherwise known as PTBA, covering Tacoma, Gig Harbor, Midland, Spanaway, and Puyallup. Our daily operations are overseen by our fearless leader and CEO, Mike Griffiths, and other chief officers. The agency as a whole is governed by a board of commissioners that are elected officials over the portion of the county we serve. So this is kind of like a bird's eye view of Pierce County. If you wanted to kind of take a deeper dive into this, you're welcome to take a look at this system map on our website. But I did put this slide into play for all you number crunchers. This is kind of a at-a-glance view for taking a look at where that 292 square mile service area is. It's serving 13 cities and towns in that area. And then, this data is off of 2023, where we reached 6.8 million rides annually. So who are our clients? Take a look in the lower left-hand corner of this slide. Those are the 4 main services that we provide. And that would be, people coming from here to there using bus, as well as our ADA client access using shuttle. And then we have commuters going to and from work, that 1 round trip a day to get to their jobs, and using rideshare, again, formerly known as vanpool, as well as the runner service, which is more like a Uber Lyft vibe, which is also known as our micro transit, helping make that extra leg of the trip in some areas. So today's and this week's hot topic is, housing and transportation and how, why it's so important. So typically, transit-oriented development centers around high-density residential development and major transit corridors. So having public transportation agencies involved in those conversations in the early stages allows for better planning and coordination for transit use. And as Laura said, parking is expensive. It's expensive to build and maintain. Having developments that connect people with public transit options decreases the need for as much dedicated residential parking. So last year we did several surveys trying to reach out with the public, get their engagement, involvement. You know, what does transit look like to you? You may remember some of those conversations we were having. And we hear from the public that other partnering agencies about the need for transit to support these developments, including increased frequency and span of service. So these high density developments typically center around areas with congestion. Public transportation is the ideal way to make or to move more people using less vehicles and providing other transit opportunities for residents. So what are we doing about it? Some of our partnerships with the state, local agencies and their planning teams work together proactively to strategize implementation methods to address overall congestion, as well as actively engaging in those conversations surrounding traffic mitigation services. Some of the innovative solutions we've implemented most recently was our March service change. Guys, this was the largest one in the last 12 plus years, and that's touching all 29 of those routes. These tweaks vastly improving the transit experience for our riders, making connections, providing more accurate schedules, and ensuring buses are arriving on time and more often. So as a part of that service change, we launched the South Sound's first high capacity transit service known as Stream, as well as over the last couple of years, adding on-demand transit known as Runner. And Runner has specific zones, and those we have 6 currently serving Ruston, Tide Flats, Puyallup, JBLM, Spanaway, Parkland, Midland, otherwise known as unincorporated Pierce County, and and Gig Harbor areas. So our ORCA programs, this is more my wheelhouse. This is, you know, what do I do in all of this? What is my part in all of this? So we're all familiar with bus or transit, our on-demand Runner, formerly known as, rideshare, formerly known as Vanpool, and Runner. So all 3 of these components fall under the umbrella program we call ORCA for Business. It's kind of like package deal. You know, we're all familiar with the term bundle pricing. Who doesn't love a deal? So when I say deal, I'm talking 90% off retail pricing, okay? And it just takes the minimum of 5. So if your business has students, clients, employees, or in terms of ORCA for multifamily, this may be referencing the number of units you provide or residents or tenants you serve. So I'm going to put a little plug in there. If looking at our ORCA for Business or ORCA for multifamily options have piqued your interest in the slightest, I highly recommend that you contact us and talk to any one of our team. I'm one of 3, and talk to us about what's in it for you, because we have an incentive coming around the corner that you might want to be having these conversations now. So I'll just say that for now. Another program we offer is Community Van. This program is really unique and honestly like no other. It is a month-to-month program where you are charged only $1.07 per mile with a $50 month minimum, and that covers the cost of fuel and maintenance, taking several trips a day. So that's a really, really great way to use it if it's not just your typical ride share, which is like one round trip to work. If you need to make multiple trips throughout the day, maybe it is an organization that's, you know, taking clients to several locations in a day's run, that would probably be more fall in the community van spectrum. So my goal is to help you reach yours. And our team has an aggressive outreach plan this year, and we're looking for who we can help. A lot of the ways we're trying to get the message and these words out to people is by doing that work, talking to neighborhood districts and chambers and councils, and doing events and pop-ups. So really, big picture, guys, we support Pierce County in their TDM policy work, and are a part of that by contributing the transportation aspect in support of cities and counties. So I know mine was a little bit faster than Laura's, and honestly, whoever put this order in play was really into cruel and unusual punishment, having me go after Laura. So, but no, Laura is absolutely fabulous, and you learn something from her every time she speaks. So I'm really grateful to be here and share Pierce Transit's piece in all of this. And like you, I'm excited to hear what Jordan has to share next. Thank you, Casey.
Thanks, Tammy. That was great. You answered quite a few questions for me just about the nature of Pierce Transit, and that helped me out a lot personally. So that was fantastic. And yeah, sorry to throw you for a loop on when you were going to be presenting. Just like to keep it kind of crazy. All right, Jordan, you're up next. We're excited to hear what you have to say. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Tammy, if you'll unshare.
Let me hang on. I think I can.
There we go.
There we go. Thought I could do it for you, but I don't think I could.
Awesome.
This will stop others. No.
Great. Everyone see that okay?
Perfect. Yep.
Awesome. All right, well, I'll just start by saying hello again. And again, my name is Jordan Rash. I'm a senior project manager for transit-oriented development at Sound Transit. My job is effectively to be a developer for Sound Transit, and we work with, my colleagues and I work with our development partners and their general contractors to build TOD on our surplus properties. But we also play a role in station area planning, thinking about how our stations get built and how best to get people to and from those stations and around the stations as well, because they are a part of our community, not just a island within it. We also work on things like community TOD, thinking about developing TOD around our stations, not just TOD on our surplus properties. And we also get involved in things like community planning, thinking about zoning and transportation, transit in our station areas, and of course, working with our development partners to help them secure project financing. So pretty, run the whole gamut of TOD work within our team. But for an agency like Sound Transit and other special purpose districts, we can sometimes get caught up in our special purpose and miss the whole point. Our job is as a transit agency, therefore we're providing transit service. But for most people, they aren't riding our buses or trains just for the sake of going for a ride, right? We're not Disneyland. This isn't Wild Waves. We're a transit agency. We're trying to move people from somewhere to another place. And we're trying to help think about how those places get developed. And that's how we, at least how we approach things on our TOD team. So, our transit is really a service to supporting those places, often as existing and as well as future transit-oriented communities. So in that vein, who are our, we know we need housing close to light rail and other forms of high capacity transit. We've supported things like the TOD bill, which of course is not yet passed, but nonetheless, the royal we are working on it, not just the Sound Transit we. And as well as the missing middle bill, House Bill 1110, to increase density in our communities, as that is where we can provide the service, the transit service, which ultimately makes living in these areas more affordable, as you just heard Laura talking about earlier this afternoon. Our clients want more service, and they want it as soon as possible. I mean, I know myself, being a Tacoman, I want that Tacoma Dome Link extension so I can ride the light rail to the airport tomorrow. I don't want it in years. I want it tomorrow. And I think most folks feel that way, both inside and outside of Sound Transit. So, when we think about our clients and our clients think about our transit options, they want those housing options close to that service as well. Hence our support for greater density, greater housing within that close distance to high capacity transit, the half a mile or closer to those transit stops. So how is Sound Transit working to resolve this? Well, first off, we have been directed by the state legislature to utilize surplus properties for the development of affordable housing. Specifically, it's in state statute, it's RCW 81.112.350, which directs Sound Transit to utilize 80% of our surplus properties suitable for the development housing and offer those properties first to qualified entities for the development of affordable housing. And qualified entities are local governments, they are affordable housing developers, nonprofit affordable housing developers, as well as housing authorities. So those are the three buckets that qualify as a qualified entity. And of those properties that are sold or transferred to a qualified entity, 80% of the units that they construct must be serving tenants or property owners, because they can also be affordable housing or affordable ownership. 80% of those units must serve 80%, those with earning 80% of the area median income or below. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but that's why we just usually refer to it as the 80-80-80 rule. So if you hear that, that's what that means. So while we have this, requirement under state statute that 80% of our properties suitable for the development of housing are offered first to qualified entities, we're actually well beyond that in terms of that minimum threshold. We're over 90% of our surplus sites that have been suitable have been offered first to those qualified entities for the development of affordable housing. And of all those sites that have been transferred to qualified entities, again, there's the second 80% of the units. Well, all of those projects that have been transferred to qualified entities have been 100% affordable. So there's not been anyone using that additional or that 20% of those units as market. They've all been affordable projects. So we're really proud of the work that we've done thus far. In terms of planning for TOD adjacent to our stations, that's something that's actually relatively new to Sound Transit. It does predate the pandemic, but it's not like we've been doing this since our inception back in 1996. This is really only something we've been doing for the last 7 or 8 years, thinking about how we can best align our transit services so that we can maximize TOD outcomes. It was always, prior to the ST3 package, TOD was just kind of like a found outcome, right? It wasn't something that was really thought of. It wasn't a integrated part of the station area planning work, but it is today. So that's why we're seeing TOD opportunities pop up with projects like on East Link, the Federal Way Link Extension, and eventually when we get to Tacoma, the Tacoma Dome Link Extension and other extensions. But some of our earlier projects, like the initial one line, really didn't include TOD in the stationary planning work. So I want to give a couple quick examples. The very first, and these are just examples of the types of TOD projects that we're able to pull together. And these are just ones that are in the development stage. They're not in the construction stage yet. These are projects that have been awarded to development partners, and they're planning to go to construction here in the not too distant future, but they're really indicative of the kinds of things that we do. So the first one is Overlake Village Station. It is adjacent to the 2 line, which just opened here, a week and a half ago. And the site here is about 2.25 acres adjacent to Overlake Village Station. And I believe Bellwether is going to be calling this project Prisma, if I'm not mistaken. This is hot off the presses. But they're going to be building 333 units of affordable housing on this 2.25 acre site. And they're really trying to reduce the amount of parking. They're going below the city code for parking in this particular area. So they have reduced parking and helping them to increase the number of units and offer those units at a very deep level of affordability. And they're in the permitting phase right now, working with the city, and they're planning to go to construction in mid to late 2025. Another example, again, just to illustrate the kinds of work that we do, a little bit closer to home is the Kent Des Moines Station North TOD site, because we have 2 TOD sites at Kent Des Moines Station. This one was awarded to Mercy Housing Northwest, and they're planning to build 220 units, or approximately 220 units of affordable housing over ground floor commercial. They too are looking to begin construction. But these are just the kinds of things that we're able to accomplish if we're able to utilize these surplus properties for affordable housing development. And so, that's really how we're doing it. at Sound Transit, and we're helping to facilitate construction of these affordable housing units as quickly as we are able. And that's just not as the Sound Transit we, that's the royal we as well, because obviously Sound Transit doesn't do this work in a vacuum. You know, we've got our affordable housing development partners, you know, the nonprofits, the housing authorities, but there's also, you know, our partners in the funding agencies from the Housing Finance Commission, the local funding agencies like Arch and SHAPE, and then, you know, Department of Commerce, you know, all of these other agencies are bringing dollars to these projects, and there's only so much capacity to go around. But thus far, the TOD program at Sound Transit has helped to facilitate construction of more than 3,300 units of housing, and that's either completed or in the works. And that can be anything from it's in the permitting phase to active construction. We do have an active construction project at Angle Lake Station, which is also relatively close here to the South Sound. And of those 3,300 units, more than 2,500 of those units are affordable housing. And that's just on our surplus properties here in the region. So it does not include any you know, community TOD, which is, you know, development on property that is not owned by Sound Transit. And these projects represent more than $1.7 billion in public and private investments. Some of these projects have also generated some revenue for Sound Transit, and those are, of course, coming predominantly from the market rate projects, which has helped to return $75 million to the agency, which then helps us to deliver our capital projects, such as the Tacoma Dome link extension, more quickly. Two more slides here. I want to talk a little bit about the revolving loan fund, and then we can hopefully discuss a little bit of that when we get into the Q&A. So as part of ST3, which I mentioned earlier, Sound Transit was directed to establish a revolving loan fund that came out of the RCW I mentioned earlier, 81.112.350, directed us to, when we were to offer Sound Transit 3 to the voters, that in part of that package, that Sound Transit would create a revolving loan fund as part of that package, which would be used for surplus property and development of affordable housing. It also authorized Sound Transit to release that package and then, like I said, create that revolving loan fund. And in addition to that, we were directed to put $4 million into that fund every year for 5 years to get to a total of $20 million. We started doing so in 2019. And so following a multi-year engagement, affordable housing nonprofit, the Low Income Support Corporation, or LISC, many of you I'm sure are familiar with them. We have, working with them, we were able to identify funding needs and fund structure opportunities. And Sound Transit identified funding for land acquisition as a top affordable housing funding need. Thus, the contribution of those funds from that revolving loan fund to an existing fund was also the preferred structure, and that we selected the Washington State Housing Finance Commission's Land Acquisition Program, or LAP, as the most suitable development vehicle. The expanded LAP is a tool that can be utilized by the affordable development community to create affordable TOD near our high capacity transit by strategically acquiring property, particularly in areas where the agency does not anticipate surplus property for TOD, you know, or we have very little surplus property for TOD. So we're trying to maximize those TOD opportunities in those station areas. Funds can be used for land acquisition as well as some pre-development costs for affordable housing, serving 80% of the area median income or below. And this is something that is also, again, hot off the presses because our Sound Transit Board will be voting on the key business terms this month to approve that relationship, that transfer of those funds to the commission. And that would go, like I said, into the land acquisition program. And, you know, lastly, I want to touch on the Tacoma Dome link extension and just kind of give you an update of where we're at. You know, so we're in the draft environmental impact statement step at this time. We anticipate releasing that DEIS in third quarter of this year. The draft EIS analyzes the document and documents a project's potential impacts to the natural and built environment and proposes ways to mitigate unavoidable impacts. When the draft EIS is published, there will be an opportunity to make formal public comments on the project that will also be sent to the Sound Transit Board of Directors for their consideration. We're also doing, TOD feasibility, retail use of potential station property as well, as part of the various alternatives you see here, and doing some stationary planning based on alternatives as well. This includes consideration of TOD opportunities, as I mentioned, but we do not just develop stations for their TOD, as I've also noted earlier. It's the other way around. We are building our transit service first, and then the TOD is kind of the ancillary benefit. And that's really just because of what we are as an agency. We are a transit agency first. But as I noted earlier, we weren't doing the TOD planning, whereas now we are. So we might build a transit station in the past and just say, well, whatever's left is what we might be able to utilize as TOD. Now we're saying, if we're going to build a station in this area, how can we best orient that station to serve our transit riders first? But how do we leave ourselves with something that is developable? So it's just kind of adding that little layer to think about how best to utilize that station, because obviously building a station and having it be just the cheapest or easiest to access, but then having little slivers of property around it is not a fully formed thought. So we're really trying to pull all that together into a single process. So I think that's really it for me. I guess I'll leave it there, and looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Jordan. Yeah, so that was very informative, all three of you. I really, really appreciate you three being here today to give us your perspective on your work, what you guys are doing, how it relates to housing. Lots of great combined efforts here. Now is the time where we're going to open it up for questions. We've got plenty of time. We've got about 35 minutes all in full. We could discuss, we could chat for the rest of that time. We don't have to fill that time up either, but this is the time for questions. Feel free to throw some questions in the chat, raise your hand, that little button down at the bottom. And we'll probably do the hand raising at first, unless it starts getting a little quiet, then you can just unmute yourself. Looks like Rachel's got a question. Go ahead, Rachel.
I do, yeah. Thank you so much for all of this information. So helpful to hear the efforts that are happening. I do have a question for you, Jordan. I know that you referred to the 80-80-80. I have 80% of units are affordable to 80% of the median income of the area. What is the third 80?
So it's actually the first 80 in the process. So it's 80% of our surplus properties suitable for the development of housing must first be offered to qualified entities for the development of affordable housing. So that means our offering is usually through an RFP process. We publish these RFPs, send them out to qualified entities. Again, those are affordable housing, nonprofits, local governments, and housing authorities. And if any of them say, hey, we want to build something on this site, we then can enter into negotiations on those key terms and eventually pass that property on to them. That could be either a no-cost transfer, it can be a low-cost sale, it can be market rate. Usually if we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about steep discounts on that property, if not a no-cost transfer. And then once they have it, that's where the other two 80s come in. 80% of those units that they build on that site, once they get it, must serve 80% of the area median income or below.
Okay, I do have a follow-up question to that. I know that this is the focus for today is on transportation, and I'm really excited to hear about all the efforts happening. I also wonder, I think from the perspective that you've been able to be involved in the conversations, we talk about affordable, but I also have questions around attainable, right? For instance, the median income in Puyallup, right by the Sound Transit Station right there in Puyallup, the median income is around $88,000 a year. So 70 or 80% of that would be at that 70,000 range, which the apartments in that area, if you're looking at that kind of high density living situation there, within even walkable to the Sumner Station there, and even probably Puyallup, the average rent you're looking at is about $2,000 a month, right? So I think what we see is we encourage the affordability, but then there's also so many hoops you jump through that like you have to make 3 times the rent to be able to move into that rental. And so have you heard any conversations around not just being affordable, but also creating attainability for individuals who are trying to live in those high density areas close to these transit options?
Were you hoping I would respond to that, Rachel?
Yeah.
Okay. So attainable, at least in how we think about it, is, you know, you're looking at someone as a tenant or potential tenant. What is it they can afford? And that's why usually our affordable housing partners, you know, like a nonprofit developer, is providing a range within their projects. You know, I go back to the Overlake project, they're offering a range of incomes that'll, you know, serve tenants earning between 30 and 80% of the
Oh,
area median
nice.
income. But their average is going to be 50% or below. Like that's their key term. So they're getting pretty deep levels of affordability. How they're able to do that is in part because Sound Transit is selling that property at an extremely steep discount.
Yeah.
Specifically, and this is, you know, all public record, so it's not like anything that's, you know, behind the scenes. But that property was worth $26 million, or it is worth $26 million. We're selling it for $250,000. So that is how we're helping to
Wow.
facilitate that outcome. But then when you're talking about attainable, you're right. Like if they were to set all those units to 80% of the AMI, that's not attainable for everybody, right? It's
Right.
attainable for someone who's earning 80% of the median income. So when we think about attainable, that's what we're trying to do is create that diversity of incomes within the project. And sometimes we're helping to push that developer to think about those kinds of things. But I can tell you from working at Sound Transit now for almost 5 years, most of those folks that we're working with, you know, like the Bellwethers and the Mercies, like I pointed out earlier, they're well aware of this issue, and they really are trying to get that deeper level of affordability. Where that's largely coming from, aside from those discounts from Sound Transit, it's also from those funding sources from, you know, the commission, you know, from the local financing, you know, partners like Arch on the east side in this case, from Commerce. Those funds are really helping them bring down the cost, unless they're able to offer those units at a lower AMI.
Nice. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your response.
I should take myself off mute before I ask somebody else to take themselves off mute. All right, Ben, go ahead.
You say Ben?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My question is relating to the practicality and issues surrounding affordable housing that doesn't have parking. And I think the goal of TOD is to get where people don't need cars. I'm on the SHAPE committee, and when we were talking about this with our group, the people who had lived experience were very skeptical about people trying to get them out of their cars. And I was surprised by that, because I'd always looked at eliminating transportation as taking, you know, 15% or 10% of their money and being able to put it towards something that's more useful. But what we heard from people with lived experience is that oftentimes the car is the last thing they want to give up, because in a pinch, they can live in their car, or they can work somewhere that they couldn't have transportation with. And I had never considered that. And they were looking at me as an architect as somebody who was trying to take something from them instead of trying to make it this cost-effective thing. And I was wondering, for people who are in the affordable housing sphere, who have tenants and things with cars, what you guys are seeing, and if the TOD work where we're not having cars or not having parking, if that really, if in suburban areas, if that's really working, because maybe it's easier in Seattle than it is in Tacoma or in Puyallup or Sumner.
I'm happy to speak to that first, Tammy and Laura, if you'd like. I'm seeing
Whoever
nods.
wants to go first.
Okay. Okay, great. So Ben, first, I put this in the chat, but thank you for your service on that committee. That's really important work. So thank you for doing that. I think in part, you're right. It is a little easier to accomplish in Seattle. We have a lot of transit options in Seattle, and some of that is from Sound Transit, some of that's from the city, some of that's from Metro. You can get around pretty easily in Seattle without that transit service, or excuse me, with that transit service. So you don't necessarily have to have a car. I think that's what a lot of us in Pierce County would like to see, at least for, you know, some of the bigger cities like Tacoma, Lakewood, Puyallup, Sumner, you know, places that are on the Sounder line, the extensions of with TDLE for the extension of the one line, you know, Pierce Transit's enhanced service on Pacific. You know, that's where you're able to probably more able to build something where you have extremely reduced parking, if maybe even no parking, once that transit service is created. And that transit service, I'm referring to the extension of the one line TDLE. What we're seeing is that it's a little bit, if you build it, they won't come. Meaning that, you know, like when we have the 2 line in Redmond, you know, where we're looking at our development opportunities there, that high capacity transit service enables the developer to reduce that parking, right? Whereas if we're just building apartments or you know, 5/2 kind of thing next to 520 without that high capacity transit service, they're not likely to reduce parking that dramatically. So it's a really a symbiotic relationship. And you're right, until we have adequate transit, it's going to be really hard to reduce that parking very much. Definitely appreciate that there's folks that need their car. You know, their job is not on the transit line, or they have, you know, some sort of responsibilities that require that they have a vehicle, or at least access to a vehicle. It's a tricky situation, but when we're talking about trying to make projects affordable, make them pencil, oftentimes parking is one of the things that keeps them from penciling. You know, it's a high expense. It's really not providing much revenue to a developer. It's largely a cost. And that's why we Sound Transit's trying to work with those developers to say, hey, let's think about reduced parking so we can increase the number of units, as well as potentially reduce the level of affordability, or improve the level of affordability is a better way to say it.
Thank you. I have a quick follow-up on that, and I don't know if this is something that you guys are considering, but there's one metric for affordability, which is I think what we use now, which is rent and utilities is 1/3 of your income, or 30% of your income. The other metric that I think maybe is more holistic and maybe more rational is 40% of your rent and your utilities and your transportation costs. And if we were to, I mean, if true affordability includes those things and healthcare, but I think that's too big of a thing to take on at the moment. But if we started looking at affordability as including transportation, and our AMI was based on 40% for these things, I think it might start pushing development and making things easier to do closer to transit, which would be, I think it would be a strong move for us to consider that, to where we start looking at the ecosystem as a whole instead of just looking at housing as housing.
I'll speak a little bit on this from the transportation advocate perspective as well. Obviously, I'm not as well versed in the affordable housing aspects, but yeah, I think we need to be very realistic about the fact that living without access to a car is really hard. Like I said at the top, like, our transportation system is not set up to allow you to do what you need to do. And to quote Ruben Casas, who's a professor at UW, he did a panel for us a couple of years ago, and he made a really great point that you are spending time or you are spending money on your transportation. If you can afford to have a car, you're traveling for less time, but you're spending more money to do it. If you do not have access to a car for whatever reason, you are spending significantly more of your time taking bus transfers is the reality most of the time. And I've lived without a car in places that make it really easy to do that. I've lived without a car in places that make it incredibly terrible to do that. And I think as we're thinking about this, kind of like Jordan said, thinking about reductions, culturally, we think about car access as like every person in a household needs to have their own individual personal car that is their car. And so as children get older, become teenagers, you get a house that had 2 cars, now maybe it's got 4, and where are you going to store all this, where are this going to go? And so thinking about like my spouse and I do own a car, we own 1 vehicle. I don't have access to that most days. My spouse has it, but I know that with a little bit of planning, I can make sure that I have access to it. And I don't do my grocery shopping by bus anymore. And you know, it's having more flexibility in how you use your time, right? So I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't own a car or have access to a car. So when we're having these conversations, we need to be really realistic and empathetic about it. I appreciate you bringing up the point about car ownership being a fallback for when housing falls through. That's a really great point, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think about parking in kind of a, I don't know, this whole thing is like both like a chicken and egg situation and a carrot and stick thing, right? So we need fewer people to be driving. People aren't going to stop owning so many personal vehicles and driving so much unless we both have great alternatives for them to feel comfortable trying and then choosing to continue to use those. But also we need to make it, to be blunt, we need to make it more unpleasant to drive if we want people to stop driving so much. Driving is, and especially parking, is highly, highly, highly subsidized at the personal level. It's not subsidized at the development level. And if you're, yeah, sorry, I'm very jet lagged right now. I'm doing my best. Lost my train of thought there. If we want people to be driving less, we need to more clearly reflect the actual cost of vehicles. So, and if we want to increase, all right, I got back to my point here. If we want to increase the amount of transit that we're offering, we also need more people to be using transit. This is that chicken and egg thing. We need to show ridership to be able to increase service, to increase ridership, right? So, unfortunately, the transition is really hard. And unfortunately, the people who are most likely to be negatively impacted by making it worse to drive are low income folks. And that's not fair. But we are at a point where we cannot afford to continue doing things as we have been. And we need to start making hard policy choices now, because every decision that we make right now has impacts that will last for the next generation. We're doing the comprehensive plan update right now. That's a 20-year document with a 10-year update cycle, right? That's a decade. And if we're looking at things like climate and we're looking at general like community access and health, we can't just keep pushing things out forever. If you build something now, that's going to be the way that it's built for the next, you know, several decades, right? So it's hard. It's hard. It's not fun. But we have to make those choices now if we want our transportation systems to get better.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was very, very helpful. Looking in the chat here. We've got some statements in the chat. I'm not going to read them all word for word, just because we're starting to run out of time, but definitely check those out from Nicholas and Carrie. Lots of really good information in there. If we have some time in just a minute, I'll read them out to y'all. But Do we have any other questions at the moment? Lumen in the room. There's some really good points being made and conversations coming up in my head, but I don't want to derail us too much. So the room is open for questions or verbal comments as well. Harish, go ahead.
Oh, did you say parish?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. True Parish?
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, hello. I was like trying to write down my questions as everyone was like speaking and stuff like that. So excuse me if it sounds a little bit kind of like I guess weird, but to introduce myself, my name is Trayvon Parrish, or just Trey for short. I am a Running Start student that lives in District 2 or Northeast Tacoma. And I go to high school at Stadium High School and Tacoma Community College. I don't own a car. Cars are really expensive, and to get to TCC, which is where I primarily go to for school, I have to take anywhere from like, I would say typically 8 to 5 buses a day. And I was kind of wondering, like, you know, like with these projects and stuff like that, I just want to say you guys are doing God's work, and I love everything and all the work that you guys put into urban design, development, and just transportation and stuff like that. But I was kind of wondering, like, how the general people or just general communities, um, how can they learn why these projects take so long and stuff like that? Because if I could just like say like one kind of, I wouldn't say criticism or comment, but like I wish the timelines were more ambitious. Because I mean, like looking at the when Sound Transit eventually does come, for example, to Tacoma at the Tacoma Dome, like I was kind of doing the math, and I think I'm gonna be like in my 40s, and I'm 17 right now. And so, just I was just kind of wondering how people, young people and just people in general can understand why these projects take so long and what people can do to generally, make these potentially go or come a little bit faster. So
Thank you, Trey, for that question. And thank you for your participation and your activism and at such a young age. That's incredible. Looks like Jordan wants to answer your question.
Yeah, I'd say acknowledge Trey. We all want our transit now, so I totally feel your pain. The good news is we're hoping to have the Tacoma Dome Link extension open in 11 years from now, 2035. And if you end up as old as me by that point, which I'm in my 40s, that means that it won't be, I'll be 52 when that opens. So, yeah. So anyway, point is I feel your pain. To answer your question, but how can we make it go faster? What takes a long time, and this is true for both the affordable housing as well as for the transit service. It's not just the transit service. Permitting takes a long time, and oftentimes that's for good reason. We're dealing with sensitive properties. For example, Tacoma Dome Link has been delayed because our initial proposal was to run the Federal Way terminus from the downtown Federal Way station at South 320th close to Highway 99 and then bring it into Tacoma. When we went through that due diligence process, we found this particular site where the former Indian school was. And there, unfortunately, are a number of cultural resources there that would prohibit Sound Transit from building through that area. And when I say unfortunate, it's because it has the unfortunate history. It's not the delay, is the unfortunate part. So that resulted in us having to go back to the drawing board, slow some things down. But then also we're crossing the Puyallup River, and we have to be very cautious there. And again, that's just the Royal We, not just the Sound Transit We. We don't want to damage, sensitive habitats and threaten already threatened salmon runs. There's impacts to property. I mean, we have to be very cautious in how we do these kinds of things to avoid unnecessary and unmitigatable impacts. So that's why in part takes so long. And then if you're looking at as an affordable housing developer, yes, permitting takes time, but oftentimes they're doing the permitting and they're financing at the same time. They layer that, so they are trying to go as fast as they can, but it takes a good 18 months to get all that financing done, working with their lenders, their tax credit bundlers, working with the commission, working with commerce, working with the city, and going through the permitting process. It's just complicated. Hopefully what we're able to accomplish, though, are ways to accelerate the actual construction. And there are some ways that developers can do that, which are things like cross-laminated timber or other forms of mass timber, so that the construction is actually much shorter on site. They're largely manufacturing these products off-site and then trying to assemble them on site, so it can go a little bit more quickly, at least in terms of the actual on-site work. And we, speaking of that, slight tangent, we actually just awarded a joint development site, which is where a developer is going to be building on our surplus property, but it's air rights up in University District, and that developer is using mass timber, and that's the Low Income Housing Institute. So anyway, that's probably more than you were bargaining for with my response, but I feel your pain, and yeah, the sooner we can get it, the better.
I see. Just thank you so much for answering my question. I do have like just one more. And I guess this also might sound a little bit weird. I'm just curious because I do have a background in like nonprofit work, volunteering, and youth civic engagement. And so, my question is kind of like, who, from what I've read from, the history of like, transit in the Puget Sound and how that has determined a lot of like the urban design and planning and just I guess you could say the functionality of the Puget Sound and where things are at. I feel like a lot of that, a lot of what we have now was very much dictated by certain, I guess you could say, outspoken people who, didn't want this there or were outspoken against transportation and so on and so forth. So my question is kind of like, just like, who are the general people, like interest groups or like communities that generally like push back against like say affordable housing, say against like, transportation and these major projects in the Puget Sound? And does that contribute as well to why these projects take so long?
Whoever feels comfortable and prepared to answer that, go for it.
I can start, but I'm going to keep my response shorter. And I think Laura would be great. We could speak to it from more of an advocacy side. Yes, you're right. We've had several ballot measures prior to the Sound Move ballot measure that was passed in 1996, and those prior measures failed. And I think that largely then dictated the development patterns that you see. If you can't have high capacity transit in your cities, you can't have, denser development adjacent to that high capacity transit, your only other option is to sprawl. And once you sprawl, it's hard for us as a transit agency, and I'm guessing Tammy's going to agree when I say this, it's harder for us to serve that. It doesn't make sense for us to build a light rail line to, Graham. It's not dense enough. And it may never be. Like, it may take hundreds of years before that gets to be dense enough where it starts to make sense to have high capacity transit. Not to mention, we have to start serving these other communities first. So you're right. That's what's happened in part. I don't know. I can't speak to any specific person or persons that would have been, impediments to that, but those past decisions certainly impacted us as a region.
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at this. I think I can speak a little bit more freely than Jordan and Tammy maybe can. So I find that when we hear opposition to transportation projects, it generally comes from a place of not understanding, and it comes from a place of, well, that's not for me. culturally, we have a lot of negative associations with transit ridership. That comes from systemic racism. That comes from a fear of visible poverty. That comes from all of these assumptions about who rides the bus and why they do it, and the safety of being on the bus. This is a lot of perceived safety stuff that is not doesn't necessarily line up to the actualities of using transit. I find that taking transit is one of the most community forward things that I do in my life. Seeing people talking to each other, meeting each other, answering each other's questions, helping each other out. Like, there's incredible community on transit that is just not reflected by these negative associations that we're still really holding on to. The other aspect here is people are thinking, well, I'm never going to use the bus, so you're doing this thing, or I'm never going to take the light rail. You know, it's not for me. So you're doing this thing that's going to make it worse for me to drive. I'm thinking about like the Pacific Avenue Bus Rapid Transit project that has been transformed right now to the Stream Community Line, the enhanced bus overlay service, because the BRT project got a little wonky, and that faced concern from people along the Pacific Avenue corridor, basically from the very beginning. And part of that is because there was discussion about taking vehicle lanes and turning them into transit lanes. Sorry, I know you know all this stuff, but I'm just saying for the benefit of everybody. And so it's this concern that like, well, no one's even going to use that. So why are you taking my bus lane, or why are you taking my car lane and turning it into a bus lane? I'm never going to use that. You're going to make my life harder. So I don't want to have anything to do with this. We see this concern also from business owners around if bike lanes come in and reduce parking. Well, nobody bikes anyway, so why are you taking the parking away? You're going to kill my business, sort of thing. But when we look at data of what actually happens when you bring in transportation infrastructure, if you put in a bike lane, people come and use the bike lane, and they'll use it to go to your business. If you put in a really good transit line, like good bus rapid transit, people will switch and use that BRT and use it. So there's a lot of fear about what it means to do these kinds of projects. There's a lot of fear about losing something that you have, this idea that driving is freedom, and that the American dream is that you have your single family house that you can drive back and forth to. And if we're doing things like, say, home in Tacoma, increasing density, reducing parking for new density, that makes it more difficult. And the fear that like, oh, my home values might go down, things like that. So a lot of it is very fear-based. And I think one of the most important things that we can do is to have that civic engagement, to be paying attention, and to communicate with your community. There's a lot of opportunities for community engagement. That doesn't mean that it's actually accessible to a lot of people. Typically, the people that you hear the most from are folks who are retired, who are affluent, who are white generally. And often those voices are also very negative for these transit and TOD type projects, again, because of that fear-based perspective of I don't want things to change. I'm concerned about how this might affect my retirement, things like that. And so, and that's because those people have the time to be engaged in these processes. So if you have the time to be on an advisory group, if you have the time to go to a city council meeting, we're very lucky to have a city council that is transportation positive, but it's generally not their top priority. But when people actually like show up, when people send emails, even if you can't make it to a council meeting to speak about why this is important to you, like the act of emailing your council member actually does really help. It adds to the numbers that they can use to say, well, people keep emailing me about this unsafe intersection. People keep emailing me about how much they want better transit or bike facilities in this neighborhood. So clearly it's a priority. That is impactful. And I think if people who have the time to do it can then be ambassadors to their community and explain however much possible, like, why did this delay happen? why is this project actually a good thing, even if you have some concerns about it. There's so much incredible value in that. And yeah, so, you know, obviously I'm a person who is paid to go to all of these meetings. So I'm really grateful for people like you, Trey, who just do it because you really care about it, and take your own time to do that. And we need more people who are really engaged in transportation as a topic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys for your responses, for your questions. Trey, thank you for being involved at such a young age. I wish I had the wherewithal to be doing that at a younger age too, but here we are. This was a wildly productive conversation, you guys. It was really exciting for me to be a part of it. Really, really, really thankful to our panelists for being here, Jordan, Laura, Tammy. Every single one of you guys for being in this room today, being focused on transportation equity and affordable housing, into whatever capacity you are here, you're here. And so this is going to bring us to a close for today's discussion, but I hope that you will continue to engage with these topics that we've brought up today, the overarching topic of transportation and housing and transportation equity as a whole. Again, thank you to our honored guests. That was wild, good, amazing conversation. I really appreciate it. Had some expectations for today, but it exceeded all of them. So, yeah, thank you again for your expertise and your dedication to the intersection of housing and transportation. We have an awesome opportunity for those of you in the room who are interested in potentially meeting some of our panelists. Because we have a reception on Thursday to kind of close out Affordable Housing Week. You have to purchase tickets for it, but if that's an issue for you, just give me an email. It's an opportunity for networking. There's going to be food, there's going to be drinks, there's going to be some of our members, some of the panelists. It's a great way to in person come together and just chat about housing and all these intersections that we'll be discussing this week. So I'm going to put that link really quickly in the chat. Momentarily, it will go in there. That's the link for the reception. And we still have a bunch of events going on this week. Please check out the schedule for all of the events. I will put that in the chat as well. That second link is for all of the events all week long. And I'm going to throw this last link in here. And this is for tomorrow's panel discussion. So tomorrow it's going to be a panel set up very similar to this one, panel style discussion. But it's going to be around public health and the intersection of public health and housing. Mark, did you have a question real quick?
Actually, it's an whoops. Okay, no video. It's an ask, as you touched on earlier and just now, is that as we continue to build up our second annual, oh, I know why, because I think this is off. Well, anyway, maybe that didn't work. Technology is our second annual Affordable Housing Week, and we Casey and Amanda have done an incredible job putting this week together, getting municipalities to actually declare the Affordable Housing Week in their cities. And no better way, if you haven't already purchased tickets, if you haven't already planned to be at the reception on Thursday, please take the time. We're all here to make a difference in a number of different areas, and all of it comes, crashing into each other, whether it's transportation, whether it's wage, whether it's employment. Affordable housing is our primary commitment, and we would love to have all of you join us on Thursday to just really make a loud statement in our community. Please participate. Let's make a difference. Thanks
so much for that, Mark. And if you guys don't know, Mark is our board president, and he is incredible. He'll also be there. He's like our cheerleader. He's awesome. And just so you know, I saw a little question in the chat, but yes, the recording for this and all of the resources that were mentioned throughout the event will be sent to you with the links involved with that. sometime next week. So give me a little bit of time, but we'll get those recordings and all the resources out to y'all, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow. If you have any questions at all, you can email me at casey@tpcahc.org and put that in the chat real quick too. Thank you guys. This is going to end our presentation. We'll see you next time. Have a nice Monday. Thanks again to our panelists.
Thanks, panel.